Happy Wednesday, everyone. I just wanted to give a update here in regards to our upcoming severe weather potential, possibly tonight, and then mostly for our day tomorrow. So, in terms of what we're looking at here, this is the Storm Prediction Center outlook for our day today. We see marginal risk down off to the almost southern parts of Stearns County, not quite. Otherwise, St. Cloud and Twin Cities included in just that general thunderstorm risk. But that 1 out of 5 is creeping a little bit closer, and it has continued to kind of creep a little closer as we headed throughout from this morning to about now. And that slight risk has also entered parts of southern Minnesota. Now, that main risk in terms of what we're looking at for today is not going to be tornadoes. That potential is pretty low, only about a 2% chance of seeing a tornado, although it does include that marginal risk. So, right up to that far southern part of St. Cloud. And I'll kind of explain when that risk comes, but it's going to be for later tonight. I'll see a little more detail here in just a second. But that main risk is going to be for hail, especially across parts of southern Minnesota, along with that wind threat. It looks to be probably what I think will be the more, in terms of the higher terms of risk for our day today, just because it looks to be a little bit more of a linear system, which favors more of that wind versus any sort of hail or tornado threat. But as the system breaks down, as it reaches central Minnesota later tonight, that's when we could see maybe a little bit more of a hail threat. But like I said, our main risk is going to be as we head into our day tomorrow. Now I realized I hadn't been posting all the updates on all my other social medias. It was only on Snapchat. But what I was mentioning, at least over the last couple of days, it wouldn't shock me if they were expanding this risk farther off to the west. And I was kind of surprised at the point, at least yesterday morning, that they hadn't. And at this point now, they have, where they have taken this enhanced risk. And before it was kind of confined down to this area, parts of central and southern Wisconsin, moved up basically to the border of Minnesota. They've taken that slight risk, which was barely into Minnesota, now into St. Cloud, and then that marginal risk has expanded over parts of far western Minnesota, reaching parts near Alexandria, that Fergus Falls area. So, like I anticipated, they did expand this bigger, and honestly, I think they might expand it just a tad bit farther to include a little bit more of Stearns County. It wouldn't shock me. I wouldn't be surprised, just due to at least not doing an upgrade, at least for our day today, maybe tomorrow morning, just because they're going to wait and see what exactly is going to go on with how the situation looks in the morning with temperatures, dew points, winds, cloud cover, all that. That'd be reasons why they're probably going to hold off on any sort of further upgrades, at least until tomorrow morning. But it wouldn't surprise me if we saw that slight risk get expanded just ever so slightly off to the west here. But I do think that this enhanced risk should stay for the most part across parts of Wisconsin, and maybe bump it up a little bit more towards Hinckley, Duluth, and just based on population size, they might bump it a hair farther to the west to include the Twin Cities metro, just to make sure that everyone has that message that there is that possibility for severe weather. It's not uncommon for them to do, especially around large population centers. So in terms of what we're looking at, we do have a much bigger tornado threat, and honestly, it wouldn't shock me if they upgraded parts of central Wisconsin to a little bit of a higher. I could see them doing a 10% for a tornado risk, just because there is some very, very favorable conditions here. I'll show you what I mean exactly by that in just a little bit, but very favorable conditions, especially across parts of central Wisconsin down into southern Minnesota. St. Cloud, we could see them. I'll show kind of what we're expecting here in St. Cloud, but I do think that a tornado or two might be possible, especially what's called the triple point, which is right where a couple of the boundaries and around the low pressure center where they all meet. It produces a lot of natural lift, a lot of spinning naturally in the environment, and it's a very common to see some tornadoes form right around that area. And it's definitely not out of the question that that could happen, as we'll be fairly close to the low pressure center over St. Cloud tomorrow, at least for a small period of time. Outside of that, we do also have a pretty good hail risk for our day tomorrow, possibly some significant hail, which is greater than 2 inches in diameter, so some potentially bigger than golf ball size hail. And unfortunately, I do know from experience that is plenty enough to crack your windshield. I did have a run into that last summer, or 2 summers ago actually, so definitely make sure we're taking precaution if we do see any hail, which definitely is not out of the question. And then as things kind of grow a little bit more upscale, which they will pretty quickly, it's going to turn into a pretty big wind threat, as well as we're going to see a pretty strong line of storms pushing through along the cold front. So in terms of what we can expect here for overall, at least storm-wise, why this is happening, we can head over here, and this is our 250 millibar level maps. And as I play this through, Let's see, we start on our day early Thursday morning, and as we head throughout our day later Thursday and then through Friday, you might say, well, there's not a whole lot, at least in terms of if you've seen any of my other videos. You go, well, you don't see much of a jet streak over Minnesota, man. Like, what is happening here? You don't see a whole lot. So this is our upper level 250 millibar, which is like around 30,000 feet. And granted, yes, a lot of our forcing is not going to come from this. We do have a small jet streak in this area around here, but it's not going to do a whole lot for us. It does put us on that left exit region, like if you have watched my videos before, is a fantastic spot for lift, but it's really not a lot. This system is going to be mostly comprised of a mid-level cyclone along with stronger mid-level winds. So we see as this trough ejects here, this trough is this big dip down here that you can kind of see a little bit by these black lines across parts of Montana, Colorado, and the Dakotas. And that's when, as you head later in our day, so this is right around 1 o'clock on Thursday, that's where our mid-level jet streak comes into play. And that is going to be a big key player here for our lift for in the atmosphere, as it puts us right in that left exit region once again across southern Minnesota and then into Wisconsin. And you can see where it really starts to eject is that area across southern Minnesota and Wisconsin, and that is where they have that enhanced risk of severe weather just based on those factors. And even moving down to the 850 millibar level, which is just a little bit lower down, you can also see some fairly strong winds here across the region, which once again helps amplify those low-level winds, low-level moisture, along with some warmer temperatures. And then also it will help with your wind shear, as your wind shear is going to be, at least your winds at the surface, starting to come more out of the westerly winds versus mid-level winds were almost out of the south. So that you can kind of picture it where if you have winds coming this way, that gives you your wind shear, and then the winds kind of help start spin things around as well. Also looking at dew points, we're going to see those dew points increase quite rapidly with those strong southerly winds tomorrow, at least before this front works through. And you'll see in terms of our dew points, later on in the afternoon, St. Cloud, we could be sitting into those mid to even upper 60s right before and right as those storms form. This is right around 2 o'clock, and we can see that very thick plume of mid 60s dew points. So it'll get very moist very quickly, but thankfully behind that, it's going to cool off quite nicely. And in terms of dew points, well, it's not going to be too moist. We're going to be sitting in those mid 40s, even lower 40s for dew points. So it should be fairly nice after that. So in terms of what we're looking at, here's one model. It's the RRFS. It's one of the newer models. It's a very short-term model. It also has a tendency to overdo things a little bit in terms of storm intensity, but this is usually a good indicator of probably what the max of something we could see. So we could see some scattered showers and thunderstorms today, not expecting anything severe. Most of the severe that we can find, unfortunately there's an ad, so you can't really see it, but be confined off to the western parts of Minnesota and the Dakotas. And then as we head here, I can try to drag it down a little bit. But then as we head later on to this evening, and then early in the morning, so this is right around 1, 2 a.m., we see that those storms are finally making it across southern Minnesota, and they'll continue to work their way through, and they could even push into parts of central Minnesota if they hold together long enough. By the time we'll wake up around that 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then things will hopefully clear out just a little bit. If things don't clear out in terms of cloud cover, storm coverage is probably going to be much weaker around central Minnesota, as we kind of need that cloud cover to break for these storms. But if it does break, this is a very plausible thing that could happen. We could see some fairly strong storms with hail and tornadoes right around that 2, 3, 4 o'clock time frame, and they're going to be moving pretty quickly along. It's an occluded front, so basically the cold front is already caught up to the warm front in this area, so it's not going to be a huge amount of forcing, which could also help keep this a little more semi-discreet. Not just a huge line of storms, but I think there will still be plenty enough forcing for this to be just a line of storms. But that is something to keep in mind, as occluded fronts don't always necessarily bring the largest amount of forcing as like a normal cold front or a warm front that you would see. But you can see how things unravel very quickly, especially across central Wisconsin and then just north of the Twin Cities metro and then up towards Duluth. And those storms will continue to push their way through with plenty of energy throughout the rest of our evening, and by 7, 8 o'clock, they'll start to fizzle out as they start to really outrun a lot of the good moisture and the good energy around available for these storms. So, in terms of different model here, so this one shows a little bit more of the fact that storms might stick around earlier on in the morning if things don't clear. So we can see this system, instead of it sticking across southern Minnesota, it kind of hangs on a little bit. This is going to be lifting. This is the initial warm front where it lifts along, and those storms stick around just a little bit. And even this shows some stronger storms with a little bit of that little black area is updraft helicities, which is basically some strong updrafts, which is supportive of severe weather, which is why they have kind of that marginal risk of severe weather across southern Minnesota for our overnight tonight, is because of the possibility that could work through. And if that does, we might not see a big break in cloud cover, which means these storms, they look more just like general thunderstorms and not a whole lot of energy in terms of what we could see. And it would be a lot more into Wisconsin and farther north where things do stay clear, where we would see a little bit more of that severe weather. But that's just one model, and of course there's a bunch of different models. This one also shows a similar picture, but the storms do kind of break down a little bit more before they really reach anywhere across southern Minnesota or central Minnesota. And then we do see that other kind of broken line form behind that later on in the afternoon around 3 o'clock. And then those storms will push off. But overall, this keeps a lot of the storms much weaker, which is why I'm not putting a lot of faith in this model. It's the NAM 3K, which is in general not a very trustworthy model. It has a tendency to overdo a lot of precipitation, and just not an overall general great model in terms of severe weather. So don't really put much heat into it. But once again, it does show the possibility that it is a possibility. These are learning guidance models. They're obviously not perfect, but we never know which model is actually right, and none of them can end up being right. We could have a totally different picture. But overall, in terms of severe weather here, this is kind of why we're looking at the potential for tornadoes and severe weather. So this is a sounding from right around the St. Cloud area. This is at 19 UTC, which is right around 2 o'clock, just before those storms kind of get here. What you're looking at, it's called a skew-T graph, so it shows kind of a vertical profile of the atmosphere. And the one thing, this is the NAM 3K model, which I said isn't great, but it kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at. So it shows only around 1,000 CAPE, which is convective available potential energy, which really is not a whole bunch of energy for severe thunderstorms. Granted, thunderstorms in general usually need about 500, but some good severe thunderstorms usually you need to sit around that 2,000 range, 3,000 range is more than plenty. But it's lacking on this end in terms of this. But what is really interesting is this photograph here. It's still, granted, it's not necessarily shaped perfectly for long track supercells and tornadoes, but it is a very common thing of what you'd see along kind of like a lifting warm front, occluded front, cold front, where it's oriented a little bit more for those that inflow to come into storms where it's kind of shaped. You can imagine if your storm was shaped in an up and down fashion. This is a very good look for that photograph to show, be supportive of tornadoes, that is, as this will kind of continue through the afternoon, evening. But in terms of a different sounding, which looks a little bit more realistic and what would probably, this one does limit at least that morning rain and kind of keeps us a little bit clear, but this pushes us just that little couple extra hours of clearing, puts us at almost 3,200 joules per kilogram of CAPE, so quite significantly a lot more energy, and with your temperature of 74, dew point of 67, more than supportive enough of some strong to very severe thunderstorms. And even tornado-wise, it's a little less of a good-looking photograph, but still definitely plenty supportive to see a weak tornado. That's definitely not out of the question. And as we head into Wisconsin, this is why at least I think they could enact a little bit more of a severe or a higher tornado threat. In terms of plenty of energy, they have a very, very favorable photograph for tornadoes and severe thunderstorms, and also some very large hail. So very supportive. This is what you want. You want it's almost like a Viking horn. Once you see that Viking horn shape, that's a very, very good indicator that you are going to see some potential for severe weather. So overall, this storm system has the potential for bringing severe weather across parts of central Minnesota. It's still very much up in the air at this point. It's really going to determine if we get enough energy, what that system does late tonight and then into early tomorrow morning. If it does work its way through, I think our chances of severe weather is going to be much, much less, just because I don't think we're going to get that sun out fast enough to see enough energy really return. But once again, it's still possible. If things do stay clear, I think large hail and probably some strong winds look likely in the early part of our afternoon tomorrow. And then also the possibility for that weak tornado threat is definitely there. And we'll see what tomorrow brings around. But overall, the overall setup should be fairly supportive of some sort of severe weather, at least thunderstorms for sure, across central Minnesota tomorrow afternoon. So if you're going to be anywhere basically west of St. Cloud, Twin Cities Metro, make sure we're staying weather aware because, like I said, there is that possibility. And of course, all more updates as new things come out later today, tonight, and then tomorrow morning. I also will be able to make another update as well if things have changed a whole lot. But overall, if you have any sort of questions, feel free to ask. But it's kind of what we're expecting in terms of severe weather for our next couple days or so. So everyone stay safe, stay tuned for more weather updates, and once again, obviously, ask any questions if you have any.